Okay.
Hey, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everybody, wherever you are in the world. I'm Paul Elam with a Voice for Men. And once again, I am very pleased to be in the company of Dr. Warren Farrell, the world's foremost authority on issues faced by men and boys. Welcome, Warren. Good to have you back.
It's always good to be with you, Paul.
Look, we talked a lot in last week in discussing your new book, The Boy Crisis. We talked a lot in terms of problem identification. We talked about the emotional health of boys. We talked about their financial, educational health, economic health, all the areas. We discussed how this is really a worldwide problem. It's not just confined to America or even North America. We're experiencing, there's a large movement going on in India right now, trying to address what's happening with men and boys. So this is a worldwide problem that we're talking about. And in getting into this, one of the things I really wanted to talk about was how we're raising our boys. And I want to get into that sort of through a back door. I want to talk about the military service. And there was some really interesting stuff. If you don't mind, I want to read an excerpt from your book, written, I believe, by the wife of a service member. And she said, "My hubby was completing the last night of rappel school in the Army. He was expected to do night rappels followed by a night run of 16 kilometers. But when he was coming down on the ropes, the helicopter pilot mistakenly went straight up, forcing my husband to free fall at least 30 feet. The damage would end up requiring 3-foot surgeries and a stem cell transfer and lead to a hearing loss, a calcified tendon, and hip problems. Yet rather than being sent directly to the hospital, he was told he would fail the course if he did not immediately run the 16 kilometers. And just as bad, he agreed to continue, only to be paying the price for the rest of his life." And one of the reasons that stuck with me, Warren, and I think I've discussed this with you before, I'm a veteran. My father was a veteran of 2 wars. He fought in Korea and he was an advisor in Vietnam. He was wounded very badly in Korea, shrapnel in the back, gunshot wounds, white phosphorus burns on his legs from a white phosphorus grenade. Also was wounded, another Purple Heart in Vietnam, and suffered a lifetime of debilitating conditions after that, for which the VA mostly ignored him and basically refused to even recognize that he developed Alzheimer's disease, which we were sure was a result of his exposure to Agent Orange. Very blunt question, Warren. At what point do we begin sitting down with our sons and telling them that it's a bad idea to serve in the military?
We begin that by being affectionate to our children when they cry, when they're infants, because in the same way, in the same degree to which we are with our daughters, because that begins to let them know that when they cry, there's responsiveness to them, that what the feelings that are inside of them can be expressed, that the way that they get love does not happen when they tough things out, but when they express their feelings and say who they are and to let us know what hurts them. So it starts before they can understand language. It starts by the behavior that is the way they get their attention, the way they get their love, and that has to be. We can't say to boys, every time you cry, we'll just take care of everything for you. That enables them, and that prevents them from being able to complete tasks and do what they need to do. So we have in the traditional raising of our sons, the basic motto is when the going gets tough, the tough get going. And so boys have to sort of learn that when something is difficult or challenging, what they need to do is ignore their pain and get on with it. And that's the beginning of the mindset that learns that to be responsive to the social bribes that say to the boy, I will achieve more recognition when I'm a Navy SEAL, when I'm an Army Ranger, when I'm sort of a Special Forces in the Air Force, or or whatever, or when I'm a football player. What we do, for example, one of the stories in the Boy Crisis book is a story about that I was told by a man who was, when he was a man, and he was reflecting back on when he was young, and he remembered that that he was playing football on the high school football team, and his father and mother had come to the game, and he was so nervous that the first two passes he missed, and the third pass though he finally caught, and he scored a touchdown with it, and his father was yelling, "That's my son! That's my son! That's my son!" Not at the first two passes that he missed, but at the third pass that he caught. Now that's fine, but the brother is standing next to the father and noticing that the father has never expressed such enthusiasm about him as a son. And so, and as he got better, the boy that was talking to me as a man got better at football. He got more and more praise from his father. So that's what I call son dropping, saying, "This is my son," dropping the name as you would a famous person when the son manifests very well, being willing to play football. Now, as it turned out, this who was a man when he was talking to me, said that eventually playing football, I completely messed up my back, and I'm suffering from that today. And he said, a few years ago, though, the most powerful thing happened to me. My brother and I were talking, and my brother started crying, and he said, "I am so ashamed to admit this, but when you messed up your back, there was a bit of time when I said to myself, oh, maybe now I'll get some attention. Maybe Dad will recognize me." And he said, "I feel really ashamed and guilty about that." But it taught the man that was talking to me about the enormous power of son dropping, that it's not just encouraging our sons to tough it out, and understanding that football is a way of is a way of preparing our sons for disposability. We prepare our sons for disposability through social bribes. The social bribes are giving them praise. The cheerleader saying, "First and 10, do it again." Translation, "First and 10, risk a concussion again." "I will love you," translation again, "I will love you more the more you risk your back, your mind. And I will continue to love you until those manifestations of your risk result in a concussion, a spinal cord injury that makes you a less than strong man." And so these are the bribes social bribes that boys have been responding to throughout all of history. And that's the underlying fabric that we need to question if we're going to say our boys, our sons, are as precious as our daughters.
Excellent. Let me circle back around to that from another direction. Let's say that we do this. We raise our boys differently and teach them to place value on their own well-being, which I think is a fantastic idea, by the way.
Yes.
Kind of not doing that is part of the problem. But here we can raise a child now, a young man, to value his well-being, but he will live in a world of women that will reject him.
Yes.
And how do we overcome that problem? Because it seems to me this is not just about parenting.
This is not just about parenting. It is also about schools. So level one, even before the level that you're talking about here, about the attitude in schools toward men and white male privilege and so on, is the fact that so many of our sons go from mother-dominated families, especially in the inner city, to female-dominated schools. So the first time they have a chance to connect with a male role model is often a gang leader who tells them, if you join this gang, we'll be able to, you can prove yourself by, doing this terrible thing to some other gang, and then you'll be worthy as a member. Well, that's the taking of male testosterone and channeling it into destructive energy, because that boy had a void of a father to help him channel, and male teachers when he was very young to help him know how to channel his testosterone into constructive energy. And And when male energy is channeled constructively, it's one of the world's most constructive forces. When it's not channeled at all, it becomes rudderless, it becomes purposeless, and it becomes one of the world's most destructive forces. Hence, all the school shootings, the lone school shootings, have been by boys who did not have father involvement, all the major lone school mass shootings. And so we have to see, and almost our prisons are filled with more than 90% of men. Basically, prisons are men's centers. And they're not just men's centers, they're centers for men who are fatherless, which means that they're not just men's centers, they're really boy centers for men who are old enough to be men, but are still boys who have never become men, in any mature sense of the word. So that provided the groundwork to the answer to your question. But repeat your question again, and I'll move into the layer that's directly related to your question.
Well, what I'm saying is, this is anecdotal, but it is my life experience in sort of examining how men interact in society, is that when men value themselves, when they value their physical well-being, when they value their emotional well-being,
yes.
when they value personal boundaries, when they have the ability to say no to things that are unfair, they are living in a world of women that their standard default position is to sexually reject those men.
Yes.
So, I mean, I hear what you're saying, but I'm trying to play a little bit of devil's advocate, maybe not devil's advocate, but maybe just questioning, how do we teach young men to cope with the sexual rejection?
Yes.
How do we teach them to even relate to or experience the world alongside women who typically value them as success objects and as sacrificial objects? And this is the way it's always been. So, because what you're saying is, let's raise young men to be rejected by women. And I'd like to let you speak to that for a few moments.
Yes. Well, first of all, I'm not saying let's raise young men to be rejected by women. I'm saying we have to really change that. So I'm going to do one more foundation piece and then get right into the rejection thing. So the foundation piece is that it's worse than that, because the impact of gender studies has been that there's a whole mentality about men in the culture now that is particularly true in the universities. And the mentality about men is that we live in a patriarchal world in which men made the rules to benefit men at the expense of women. And nothing could be farther from the truth. We lived in a world that was not a patriarchal world. We lived in a world that was dependent upon both sexes surviving. And for both sexes to survive, both our fathers and our mothers did not have privilege. They had responsibilities and they had obligations. The goal of both our mothers and fathers were to be willing for women to sacrifice their life in childbirth, and for men to raise the children that women bore, and to be willing to die and go to war. And so, it sounds like a rap song. And so rather than being honoring of our sons and saying, this is the sacrifice that our fathers made, our fathers they were not about male privilege. They were about driving taxi cabs 70 hours a week so that they could have their children not have to drive taxi cabs, and to have their wives live in homes that had a decent home over their head and a decent school and a decent community that had decent schools. They were getting up at 4 a.m. to pick up the garbage. The men who did make it to be very successful, who were the supposed white male privilege, they were men that were working their rears off, often 70 hours a week, falling into the experience of what I call the father's catch-22, meaning that the father learned to love the family by being away from the love of his family. And it isn't until the Pew Research study asked the question for the first time in history of full-time working dads, would you prefer to continue working full-time, or would you prefer, if you had the option, to be full-time involved with the children, that they got a 49% of all full-time working men said they would prefer to not be working full-time. They would prefer to be working full-time with their children. This is what men would prefer, half of men would prefer to do. And yet no one has said half of men have given up what they want to do what they feel they need to do, because they don't even ask. We've taught our sons to not even ask the question of what do you want to do. We've taught our daughters to say, what do you want to do? Get the wind beneath your wings, choose among your options, raise children, raise money, do some combination of both. Whoever you want to be, sweetie, you can be. That is wonderful. But then don't say that to our daughters, not even address that issue to our sons. Okay, so in that atmosphere, they walk into school, they walk into college, and they're learning that they are responsible. They are a product of white male privilege. If they're not white, at least they have male privilege, and so they're feeling that they are. That every man is feeling like, well, gee, I shouldn't say anything here about feelings that I'm having about maybe being rejected sexually or things like that, because I'm a person of privilege. Who am I to speak up? So we're beginning to shame our sons. But let's now delve deeper into that shame. In that shame is we have in this culture, especially in the United States, more so than in most European countries, and an attitude towards sex, of sex being dirty. It's dirty jokes. It's you can't. We rate things X-rated or R-rated if it has to do with sexuality, and so we have a very puritanical attitude towards sex. Even though we also have some of the opposite of that. You can have sex by swiping right. And so the messages about sex are so confusing to men and to women that I challenge almost any woman or man to make a coherent description of what sexuality in this culture is about, because it would run into contradictions and cognitive dissonance at every level. And so we now have your 14-year-old son beginning to feel testosterone that creates an interest in females if he's heterosexual, and he's beginning to, but he's less mature on average than the female in his class. But instead of saying to the females, you are the more mature gender, and you're the one that tends to want sex less. So I'll tell you what, women, and you're the one that wants to be empowered. So we expect you as girls to empower yourselves by being the ones to risk sexual rejection by boys who want it more. So therefore, the rejection you will receive if you initiate sexually will be less than the rejection that boys will receive if you don't. And besides, you know what you want to a greater degree. So reach out, because you're more mature on average. So reach out to boys and women. Grow up and take the risks of rejections. Learn, and in the process of learning how to take the risks of rejections, you will prepare yourself to take risks as entrepreneurs. You'll prepare yourselves to take risks in the outside world. This will be true empowerment. Also, girls, we know now that relationships work better when women are happy. When you have a happy wife, you have a happy life. John Gottman and other people who have studied this have found that sort of saying, which sounds just like fun, is in fact quite accurate. That when a woman is happy, the man is happy because he's happy that the woman is happy. When a man is happy, the woman may or may not be happy. So if you're going to be happy, then it makes sense that you should risk the sexual rejection with the type of men who fit the body language and fit this sort of the way of being, the sense of values that you want. You initiate the sex. What we're doing now with Me Too is saying, men, when you overreach, will sue you. When you don't reach enough, quickly enough, we wouldn't even know you exist or have an interest in us. So we're creating this catch-22 for men, and we're not even asking men. By the way, this Me Too, this is about us as women saying what we feel. We haven't even asked the stage 2 question, which is asking boys and men, what do you feel? Isn't this supposed to be a dialogue between men and women? Isn't that what being progressive is about? Having a chance to hear each other? But nobody has even suggested hearing boys and men. And part of the reason is because they have the privilege, they have the power. But in fact, I'd like to suggest that men don't have the power. Being required to earn more money than women do when they have children is discrimination against men. The extra money that men make not because they get the same money for equal amounts of work. Men do not get the same money for equal amounts of work. I spent 9 years researching that issue in the Why Men Earn More book, as you know, and found that, in fact, men earn more money than women, not when they do the same work as women, but when they do 25 different decisions that all lead to men earning more. But any woman who makes those same decisions, like working in hazardous jobs, working more hours per week, working in moving whenever required to move or desired to move by the boss to a different location, taking on different responsibilities, like male doctors do earn more than female doctors, but when you control for 2 cardiac surgeons who have been working the same number of years in the same type of HMO, then the men and women work about the same amount, make about the same amount. So we have all of these demonizing attitudes toward men that are being taught now, not just in colleges and not just in the social sciences, but also being taught in high schools, and even made reference to in backhanded ways in elementary schools. And these are really ruining our boys' psyches.
Warren, let me back up a couple to something you said in the middle of that talk that would seem to me to be very important. The mentality of raising boys to understand happy wife, happy life. Isn't that, in fact, itself a huge part of the problem, that what we're actually teaching to boys is that your happiness is equated to her happiness, that there really is no you. Mm-hmm. There's no your happiness. You make her happy.
Yes.
And isn't that, I mean, come on, isn't that a raw deal emotionally to send boys into that?
It is a raw deal emotionally, and it's an extension of the whole attitude toward men, that men were disposable. And so they're disposable. You know, so we are happy that men exist when there are firefighters and they're, as a volunteer, they're willing to risk their life to save our life. We're happy when men exist when they go off and become the Marine and they're willing to fight off the Germans so we don't all become Nazis. We're happy when men exist when they are when there's a 9/11 and they're 99% of the first responders. So we're happy when men exist when those men make women happy. That's all an extension of the same phenomena. And we've taught men throughout all of history, and taught animals and insects do the same thing. By the way, they all serve. They serve to make women, to please women. That is, they serve to make themselves the alpha male, so that the women will mate with them, so we'll create reproduction. So what we're talking about is an evolutionary shift of the most fundamental in our lifetime, which is why people say to me very often, aren't you sad, Dr. Farrell, that things don't change more quickly? I'm sad, but I'm also realistic that this is millions of years in operation. And the hope that I have is that human beings and plants and animals are all adaptable. And when we begin to adapt, we begin to change our neuron connection in our brains. So, for example, when a child is born, a newborn is born, when a father immerses himself in the caring for that child, he activates a nest of neurons in his brain that are, normally speaking, unactivated. When he responds to a birth of a child by working more, they don't get activated. But when he responds by focusing on the child, they get activated. And within a matter of weeks, they begin to have a male version of a paternal instinct that is similar to, but not identical to, the maternal instinct. And so this is the capacity for human beings to adapt and ask a different question, not what was not what was functional in the past, but what will be functional for our future. That is the question we need to ask. And so we now know enough about neuroplasticity to know that as we ask questions, our mind begins to adapt, our body begins to adapt, and our RCZ begins to adapt. Our RCZ is our rostral cingulate zone. which is the part of our brain that when we are praised, gets a dopamine fix that motivates us to be more and more to do more of that behavior. That is built into our psyche. So by changing our social bribes from "we love you if you score a touchdown and risk a concussion" to "we love you if you're sensitive, caring, and responsive," that's a different issue. When women begin to respond to sensitive men, that's when we'll have a nation competing to be sensitive men. That is, by the way, an insight and a line that my assistant, Emily Martin, came up with.
Well, and it's a great line, but I think it's safe to assume that we're probably not going to be there this week.
We are extremely safe to assume that, sadly safe to assume that. Yes, as I just said, we're not going to change evolution overnight, but we will not change it at all if we don't try.
Absolutely. That's another point I wanted to make. As you were talking about a few moments ago, we essentially raise our daughters with the idea, well, you can be a doctor or you can marry a doctor. Mm-hmm. You have those choices in life. And we raise men with, well, you better be something unless you want to be alone and unloved for your entire life. You better produce something. Isn't it time that we also sit down with our daughters and have talks with them about what they're expected to bring to relationships? If you go through dating sites these days, and it's been this way for as long as I've been studying the phenomena, and you see one dating ad after another, is that I want somebody who understands how to treat a woman like a princess. I mm-hmm. want to be treated like I'm special. I like nice presents, nice gifts. I like the attention paid to me, I want to be the center of the universe. Yeah. These are incredibly narcissistic expectations that we have culture-wide in women. And so part of that very slow metamorphosis of culture into one where there's more balance between the sexes, isn't that at some level going to have a mirror in women's face?
Absolutely. I'll tell you something that really struck me. As you know, Paul, I do a lot of expert witness work around the country, and unfortunately, all of my calls to do that is from fathers, and so because it's fathers that are being denied equal amounts of time with their children as a rule, and so I go into the fathers' homes, and normally speaking, these men are about the best fathers that I can possibly imagine. I think of myself as being really having a special maybe gift in being able to connect to children, but some of these fathers that are really just make me feel like, wow, I have a lot to learn here. But one of the things that even some of the wonderful fathers do is they have their room of their daughter painted in such a way as it's completely in princess mode. It's completely like you are a castle, you are my princess. And so I say to the fathers, I'm supposed to be there to observe them, but after I'm finished my observation, I say to them, do you realize that the reason you are having such problems having an equal amount of time with your children is because you've told me in a half dozen different ways that your wife thought she was entitled and a princess and privileged, and you're now repeating that princess training again with your daughter? And the guys just go, oh my God, I am creating the monster because I treat her as being so precious. I love her so much. I want to protect her, and I want her to be, held up as special. Absolutely wonderful as a warm feeling, but part of what you have to contribute as a dad is being able to set boundaries, being able to enforce boundaries, being able to require of your children to not bring your children up, girl or boy, saying I exist. Therefore, in the old days, it used to be, I exist, therefore I serve for boys. But today we're often saying, with girls, especially the ones being treated as princess, you exist, therefore you deserve. And that will be the girl who will expect to get the more Valentine's presents from boys than she gives, more diamonds from boys than she gives, more drinks bought by boys for her, more dinners paid for her on a date, expecting the boy to drive and pick her up. These three Ds, the diamonds, the drinks, the driving, these are all signs of saying to our daughter, when you are even being considered for a sexual relationship, you deserve more than you need to serve. Because boys are expected to pay for you because they're compensating for their inferiority. The amount that a boy is expected to pay on a date is the degree to which the statement is that you have to compensate for your inferiority until you pay enough to begin to be equal to me. People pay me to be a consultant because in the particular area that I'm a consultant in, I know more than they do. And so their payment is the way of equalizing our relationship. And so the expectation on boys to pay is not boys as expected to be superior. It is compensating for their inferiority. And so we need to, so that's level one. Level two is a lot of women are on the other end of the spectrum. They're women who say, we live in an unfair world. I want to be a have-it-all woman. I want to be out there. I want to be earning full-time. I want to be breaking glass ceilings. I want to be contributing to the world, but I live in an unfair world. And the unfair world means that I don't get men can do that and still have a family. And I can't do that and still have a family. Well, that's not accurate, actually. What is true is that men do that by supporting the family economically and supporting the women to be home with the children. But women can also do that. They just have to choose different types of men. And so the conversation we need to have with our daughter when they're very young is, rather than choosing the future CEO or the future man who is going to be the football player or the metaphorical equivalent of that when he gets older, look among men who are willing to be what I call father warriors, WARRIORS, as opposed to WORR, not father warriors, right? And among those, and so those might be men who you notice have a really good, playful, roughhousing manner with children, that can tease children and feel comfortable, that can yet have underlying social skills that will help children develop really effectively.
All right, going on, Warren, along the lines that we're talking about, a lot of this has to do with how we socialize, men and women, how we raise our boys and girls, the expectations, the principles that we try to instill in them, the ethics that we try to instill in them. And we seem to, as a culture, be coming up very short in that regard. And while it is most obviously disadvantaging men at this point, it also hurts women a lot. You talked a lot about fathers having the princess room and expressing that passionate love they have for their daughters in terms of protection and wanting the best from them. And of course, screening boys according to, I want a boy that's good enough for my daughter. I want him to treat her like a princess. And of course, as we see in a lot of the outcomes of that, when women find themselves in abusive relationships, many times their abusers will rationalize, hey, this has always been about you. Everything has been about you. You're the princess, and I'm sick of it. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering, just incidentally, what your thoughts are on the relationship between raising women with very unrealistic demands put on men in their lives, and ultimately, let me rephrase this a different way. What a lot of men will tell you in their relationships that they encounter with women is that what they hear is, well, I want the diamonds, I want the driving, and I want the drinks, and I want you to respect me for my mind.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And those demands and expectations necessarily lead to a loss of respect, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. respecting a woman is, in the Me Too dimension of things that we were talking about before, is saying to women, it's not okay to expect men to risk sexual rejection, whereas you have the option to do it, they have the expectation to do it. That's not equality. And it's hurting you because it's not preparing you during your adolescent years, where so much identity is created and formed. It is not preparing you to be an equal risk taker. And so then to not be prepared to be an equal risk taker, and then to be resentful of a world in which all the people who are successful as risk takers, who built the phones and the technology that we're on now, whether it's the Steve Jobs, the Bill Gates, and almost everyone who's a successful risk taker is a male. But they've built systems in the last 20 years, companies in the last 20 years, which were not giving them male privilege to go through those companies faster. They created their own ladders, their own companies there, and they hired people they started out in garages. We're not preparing our daughters to do that when we don't prepare our daughters to take risks. Also, step 2 about how we're hurting our daughters by hurting our sons. So remembering that, if there's anything I hope I say more clearly in the Boy Crisis book, is that when either sex wins, both sexes lose. There's no win. The whole concept of male privilege hurting women is just completely counter to everything that it took to reproduce. The sexes needed the other's one's love and respect in order to have sex to begin with. But let's go to the practical thing now. And when so many girls and women say that they want to do something very powerful in the world, like be a have-it-all woman and break through a glass ceiling, and so, but then they feel very frustrated that if they do that, they can't have children. In fact, we could need to re-socialize both sexes for having boys to think of themselves as father warriors who have to overcome all the obstacles it takes to be a full-time father in this culture, and to know how to get women and to get our daughters to have enough respect for boys as full-time fathers, that the woman understands that if she wants to be devoted to her work to a large degree and have a husband and have children that are raised effectively and well, she needs to be fine in her mind about finding a man who has the types of qualities it takes to be a full-time dad. And maybe he works from home and earns additional money, and maybe he doesn't, but she can find it inside of herself to have true, genuine respect for a man who is home full-time as one option for at least a few years when she and he decide she wants to be. So she and he can both feel that she is able to go through glass ceilings if she wants to, but still is able to come home to well-raised children, a husband who takes care of social skills, and takes care of social skills for the children, raises the children effectively and well. That's the type of boys and men we have to select for. And when we select for those types of boys and men and train boys to be that way, how do we train boys to be that way? First of all, by having caring male role models in preschool, in first and second and third and fourth grade, so boys can see that men who are not just imitation women, that is, they're not just sort of protector type, but they're sort of strong and teasing and roughhousing and playing and kidding. Those types of men are in our school system in the grade school level. So if a boy has that type of testosterone in him, he doesn't feel that something is wrong with him, because he learns better by doing than by sitting at the desk and taking down notes and regurgitating those notes in the next exam. We have to have the male style parenting in our school system at an early age. And then we can start to say to boys, we need to have you take care of your sister, feed your sister, nurture your sister. And then, oh, by the way, you're now 11 or 12 or whatever. And when I'm asked for a babysitter for the family, I don't just automatically recommend your sister. I recommend you or your sister, or I tell the neighbor how wonderful you are with children, so she feels able to trust, or he feels able to trust you with their children.
Well, Warren, that what you're saying sounds dangerously close to raising boys to having choices.
Yes, we need to raise boys to have voices and choices.
Um, Let me ask you, what is in the way? I mean, there's obviously many things that are obstacles to overcome in pushing toward this kind of culture, this kind of society. What do you think the biggest things are that stand in the way of raising girls to take risks and to expect to take risks out of life, and raising boys to have the option to have less risky lives?
Yes. I think two things. One is the involvement of fathers really needs to be something we revisit in this culture. We deprive boys of fathers and girls of fathers. And by the way, just for an overview on this issue, children without fathers do worse on almost every single measure. But proportionately, boys do even worse than girls do. So just to take it on a totally scientific level, um, when boys and girls have minimal father involvement by the time they're 14, I'm sorry, by the time they're 9, the telomeres of girls, that is the internal part of the cell, that when the cell is constantly reproducing, and when it reproduces, if the telomeres are short, that predicts a shorter life. When telomeres are longer, predicts a longer life. When children have been deprived of significant father involvement by the time they are 9 years of age, their telomeres are 14% shorter, which predicts about a 14% shorter life expectancy. However, the telomeres of the boys are 40% shorter yet again than the telomeres of girls. And that is both scientifically, evidence of the importance of father involvement, but it is also evidence that I have seen as I did the research for the boy crisis. In every area that I examined, boys were more upset and had mental health problems and physical health problems when there was any family disruption. When there is a divorce, boys suffer more than girls. When the Department of Housing and Urban Development moves families from bad neighborhoods to neighborhoods that they feel will be very helpful to both girls and boys growing up, the girls significantly benefit. The boys are so upset by the disruption from the friends that they knew and have fewer social skills to adapt to new neighborhoods and new groups of friends that the boys, even in the better neighborhoods with the better schools, do not do as well. When boys and girls break up in their first relationships, boys suffer greater mental health problems, go into more depression. One of the things that I found, though, as I did the research for the boy crisis, is that no one knew how to measure depression in boys. We've only used the female measurements of depression. So I created an inventory of 64 questions that drew out depression in boys, that also suicidal tendencies in boys that had not been identified, most of which had not been identified before, by only defining depression as it manifests in girls and women. And so we need a whole new way of understanding that the importance of father involvement, and that importance manifests in two different major areas. One is after divorce, when we dump fathers and in favor of those mothers who want to be with their children. And the other is in the 53% of women under 30 who have children without being married. And even among the most intimate relationships among those women, that is, women and men who are living together, but decide not to get married when they have children, even among those where the man and woman is living together, 40% of those children never see their dad, see their dad either minimally or not at all after the age of after 2 years.
That is a bit of a challenge, isn't it? I mean, if we're going to be frank about the modern zeitgeist, calling women to be accountable for their reproductive choices and how they go about that, that is very touchy area that is likely to end up with a lot of condemnation and repudiation for whoever asserts that idea.
Yes, we have to say to we have to appeal to women's true maternal instinct, and so the women's true maternal instinct is, so we've put all our emphasis in the last years on women's freedom and women's choice. And I am, as someone who's been on the board of the National Organization for Women in New York City, as you know, and I've been a very strong advocate of women's freedom and women's choice. But women's freedom and men's freedom ends the moment we become parents. The moment we become parents, we switch a gear from our freedom being paramount to our children's life benefiting as much as possible. That's the vow that we took. And the vow we take is to cut back on a certain amount of that freedom to the degree that we must for the benefit of our children. And now we know something that we didn't know 5, 10, 15 years ago when all our emphasis was on female freedom. And that is that the dynamic between fathers and mothers is a very important dynamic. There are different things that men encourage and different things that women encourage. When a mom brings up a child to a great degree, that child will feel unconditionally loved, unconditionally nurtured, and unconditionally the child will feel the sacrifice of the mother in the great majority of cases. With the father, the child is unconditionally loved, but that unconditional love manifests through conditional approval. The father saying, so the father's always working for the child's best interest. That is, the great majority of fathers are. But when the way he does it is to say, no, you need to get better grades. No, you need to finish your P's before you have your ice cream. No, you need to not hit your sister or ignore your sister or just play with your own self-interest at heart. No, you need to return those things you took from your sister's playpen and return them to your sister. And if you don't do that, there'll be no playing for the next bit of time. And so those are the things. And then how does the father get away with that without being rebelled against? He tends to create bonds with his children by roughhousing. And moms tend to go, my God, sweetie, don't roughhouse so close to the furniture. Don't roughhouse inside the house, and you're going to hurt the children. And then the children and the fathers get into this roughhousing and wrestling and stuff like that. And the mother's thinking in the back of her head, oh my God, dad is just one more child. It's like one more burden on me. But the dad isn't even able to articulate to the mom that roughhousing, the degree to which he roughhouses with the child, is the degree to which the child learns the nuances between being assertive versus aggressive. The degree to which he roughhouses is the degree to which the father creates a bond with his child, to which the dad tends to use that bond as leverage to make sure the child finishes his or her homework before they get read to at bedtime. The child feels through that bond of playing together that the child is on his side, that the father's on his or her side, that the father is many ways to a child like a roller coaster, where there's tremendous excitement, but there's safety. But whereas the mother only sees the up and the down. And so the point there being that that mothers and fathers each have a role that is different in raising the children. That role is going to create tension, and communication skills are needed to resolve that tension so the children gets the best of the mother and the best of the father. That's what I call checks and balance parenting, which is key to our raising our children effectively. And couples communication is key to being able to help the mother and the father communicate with each other to see the value of their parenting. And the last thing that is key is men need to take responsibility for learning what they contribute to the parenting process and articulate that in loving ways to women or to their male partners if they're same-sex marriages.
The name of the book is The Boy Crisis by Dr. Warren Farrell. Great conversation. We are going to continue this next week for one final installment of this. And in that part, Dr. Farrell, I'd like to talk about young men in late adolescence and early young adulthood, ones that are coming out of these fatherless homes, ones that are living in this modern, very confusing time for young men, and about how we can take the information that you've researched in this book, that you've drawn out, and how can we apply that to helping them even after some of the damage has been done in their lives.
Absolutely, it's a really good idea, and because it is as at adolescence where so many of these messages get translated into either successfully or unsuccessfully becoming a man.
And I do get on my channel, Warren, a lot of requests and messages, and I get emails regularly from fathers who want to know, how do I talk to my son about these issues in their lives? How do I keep it honest without demonizing their mother? A lot of questions that are popping up, and I'm hoping you and I can explore some answers to those things next time we meet.
I look very forward to that. That's really right on target, and and we'll get into that with great joy.
Once again, ladies and gents, Dr. Warren Farrell, author of The Boy Crisis, Myth of Male Power, Father and Child Reunion, and Men Can't Hear, or Women Can't Hear What Men Don't Say, among other books. Warren, as always, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you.
It's always a pleasure speaking with you too. You ask great questions. You give me time to sort of create the connection, the tapestry, in a way that I hope makes sense to your listeners. And we're really talking about things that no one has talked about for really all of our recent history.
Well, it makes sense to me, and my listeners are a lot smarter than I am. So
that might be the first thing today we'll argue with.
Okay, well, thank you, you guys. We'll see you next time.
Very good.